As easy as it is to correct and teach arm mechanics, the lower body is really what's putting the force and the power into the ground, and unfortunately that's where more of the mistakes are going to be made. So when you are teaching lower body mechanics, there are some things that you really want to think about and drive home to the athletes that you're working with. Some of the things that are easy to understand for kids are one, most kids need to get their knees up higher than they do. Not everybody, but most kids need to get their knees up a little bit higher. They're going to need to land on the ball of their foot instead of way up on their tiptoes or on their heels. And they're going to need to have all of the action pulling backwards, pushing backwards so that it propels them forward. So the motion of the leg during any kind of sprinting action, you're going to start up at the top with a knee drive. The knee is going to be bent at about 90 degrees and the toe is going to be up. As the foot travels down towards the ground, you're going to notice that the action is somewhat in a circular fashion, more of an elliptical fashion than a perfect circle. But as the foot comes down, it almost appears that my leg is going to hit out in front of me, but as long as I have my toe up, it's going to then come underneath. Your foot should land on the ball of the foot slightly in front of your center of mass. It's going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 inches or so at top speed in front of your center of mass. So you can watch as a coach to see, are they reaching out and pointing their toe and putting it out in front of them? Are they hitting their heel? Or is it coming underneath them at the last second and hitting the ground? As they are in their stance phase, which is when this leg is on the ground, the knee is going to be slightly bent, but we don't want it to completely collapse. So we don't want a whole lot of deformity at the knee joint or the ankle joint. They should stay rigid. And there are drills as part of this material that are going to show you how to maintain rigid joints so that you are able to apply all the force to the ground without it kind of sinking and having energy leaks. So knee up, toes up to start with, foot comes down in a circular motion, almost hits the ground out in front of them, but hits the ground on the ball of their foot, pulls back, and before the leg is not going to get like completely locked out behind you, but as it extends backwards, the foot is going to come up towards the butt, toe is going to pull in, and it's going to pull through to where it started again. You want the knee to actually collapse because that's going to decrease the lever length at your leg. Decreasing the lever length allows the foot to come through much quicker. Rather than having the leg here and it comes through in a pendulum-like fashion, you want it to come up so that it can come through faster, and it can also put you in a better recovery position to then come back down out in front of you. So the things we are looking for as coaches are getting the knees up, toes up, staying on the balls of the feet, and then a quick recovery pulling that foot through as they come back through to the top of the motion again. There are all sorts of cues that you can use, all sorts of drills that you can use, but those are kind of the basics of that of that leg swing motion. We're also going to notice that the pelvic positioning is very important to top end mechanics. Athletes should not be in an anterior or posteriorly tilted pelvic position. You want the pelvis pretty close to neutral. What you can do is have an athlete stand with the hands on his or her hips. You can tell them, pretend like your pants are full of water, and then without bending your knees, you can pour the water out the front of their pants, or they can pour the water out the back of their pants. For a lot of athletes, that's going to be very difficult. It might feel funny, but for an athlete where you see that athlete has a real big anterior tilt and they walk around like this during the day and their back is all arched, that's going to really affect their running mechanics later on. They're not going to be able to get their knees up because their pelvis is anteriorly tilted so far that it's basically not allowing the femur to come up and not allowing the hip to flex. So you're going to need to get them in that neutral pelvic position. For some athletes, it's a matter of tight hip flexors. Other, it's tight back. Some athletes, it's simply a matter of how they are used to standing and running and walking. So you as a coach are going to have to kind of assess that and figure out how you can help them get into the proper position. For some athletes that are having difficulty with it, that may be a homework exercise where you put them up against the wall with their feet their butt and their shoulders against the wall, and they have to try to press their lower back into the wall. For some people, that's no problem. For other people, that's going to be a real problem, but it's going to help them gain the core control that's necessary to maintain perfect hip and pelvic position. So they are going to have a slight forward lean at the pelvis and a slight forward lean at the upper body, but you don't want them to be tilted super far back or forward, having their pelvis tilted forward or backwards either. So those are things that you're going to have to assess and then coach to get them in the proper position. So now I'm going to go through some of the lead-up drills that we use to get athletes to have good top-end mechanics. So I'm going to have Jake come over here, and you're going to start at one side, one of these cones, Jake, and we only have about 10 yards here to work with. Typically, when you're working on top-end mechanics, you're going to have a lot more space to work with, and you're going to be going farther. So feel free to go a little bit past these cones each time you're going. So the first thing that I'm going to have him do is just run from one cone to the other cone, and I want you to work on getting your knees up pretty high. Okay, I don't want you to exaggerate it so much that you're like leaning backwards. Just kind of get your knees up high as you're going from one cone to the other cone. You ready? Just a nice kind of fast jog. Good. All right, now Jake does a great job on this, and he knows how to already run. Not all kids are going to be able to do this perfectly, so you're going to have them do more and more reps. You also noticed, if you were watching closely, that he stayed up on the balls of his feet. Some athletes will be on their heels, and it's not going to look quite right. So Jake, on this next one, I want you to go from one cone to the other cone, but I want you to land on your heels, and your knees probably aren't going to come up as well either. So just kind of make it look like you wouldn't normally do. All right. All right, so you can see he's kind of stomping now, and that's something that you may see. You may also see athletes stay on the balls of their feet. They think they're on the balls of their feet, but they're up on their tiptoes. So now kind of point your toes and show us what that looks like. Good. That's not terrible. You're going to see a lot worse than that sometimes. He was getting his knees up, but it wasn't. But he was kind of pointing his toes a little bit too much. So for most athletes, Jake, you can come on over here next to me, and I want you to stay facing me. You want them to be up on the balls of their feet, but you want to teach them what that actually means. Some kids literally don't know what it means to be on the balls of their feet. Some kids think that's their heel. Some kids think that's their toe. So we have to show them what that actually feels like and looks like and what part of the foot we want them on. So I'm going to have you keep your feet right underneath your hips like you have them. I'm going to have you rock your weight slightly forward so that you feel the weight come off of your heels. Good. And at that point, you should still be able to kind of pick your toes up so you're on that meaty part of your foot, the ball of your foot. You know where that is, so it feels pretty normal. At this point, when he's leaning forward, go ahead and do that again, I could come and I can get my hand underneath his foot a little bit. He's not up on his tiptoes. Go way up on your tiptoes. That's not where we want them. We want them down so that their heels are barely off the ground, and he has weight on the ball of his foot. For some kids, you may have to actually point to it and go underneath and say, look, this is the part of your foot that I want the weight to be on. When they are in that, on the ball of the foot, it's kind of going to feel bouncy. Can you kind of bounce on that? Good. And that's also where most kids are going to jog from. So right in place, I just want you to kind of jog in place. So if you have kids who don't really feel good on the balls of their feet, just have them jog in place. It's almost impossible to jog on your heels. Try to jog on your heels. Like that, most kids aren't going to do that. You're also not going to be up on your tiptoes when you're jogging in place, because that just doesn't feel right. So just naturally, kids are going to jog in place on the balls of their feet. If they're doing a pretty good job with that, go ahead and keep jogging in place. Then I'm going to tell him, all I want you to do now is I want you to slightly lean forward, and that's just going to carry you to the cone. So just lean forward, and that's going to carry you right to the cone. Good. All right, let's stop here at this cone. I want you to start jogging again. So go ahead and just jog in place. Just jog in place, I'm sorry. Just jog in place. So he looks pretty good. We already covered arm swing mechanics, so he's got a little bit of arm swing going. I want you to increase the pace a little bit, get your knees up a little bit, and then you're going to lean forward and you're going to go to the other cone. Good, perfect. Good. Now, that's going to feel a little bit mechanical to some athletes. It may not look perfect, but it's it's another coaching cue or a way to get kids to understand what part of the foot they should be on, what the rhythm is going to feel like, what it feels like to start getting their knees up. Generally, I will work on one of these things at a time. So I may pick knee drive, and I'm going to have him do several reps of getting his knees up. Then we're going to pick maybe the foot, and I want to have his ankle dorsiflex and have him on the ball of his foot. And so we'll concentrate on that for a while. Then you're going to put them together. So as he's practiced getting his knees up and having his ankles dorsiflexed and rigid, then we can say, okay, now put these two things together, and now he's got to get his ankles up, his knees up, his ankles rigid, and we already worked on arm swing mechanics, so I'm going to have him rip his arms back. So at this point, what I'm going to have Jake do is I'm going to have him just run through here. He's not at top speed because we don't have a whole lot of space, but I'm just going to let him kind of run through here. I want you to rip your elbows back, get your knees up, stay on the balls of your feet. Cool? All right, just a nice, easy run through here. Good. All right, so Jake does a pretty good job at running. He's got fairly good mechanics. He's allowing each step to cover ground. He's staying on the balls of his feet. He's doing everything pretty much right. Another thing that you're going to look for in some athletes is a lack of flexibility at the hips. We really want them at top speed to have space between their knees. So when they're in air, in the flight stage of each step, their knees should be separated. A lot of athletes, they just simply don't let that happen. Either they don't get the front knee up, they don't get the back knee up, or they have limited flexibility. So what I'd like you to try to demonstrate for us, Jake, is running from here to the other cone, not letting your knees spread apart very wide. Here's a challenge for you. Yeah, there you go. So that's kind of what you're going to see, and most of the time what it ends up looking like is they're not getting a good push or they're not getting their knees up. So you as a coach have to determine, are they not getting a full extension at their hip, or are they not getting good hip flexion, and then you can coach that appropriately. He also wasn't getting his feet up very high, so a cue that you can use to get their feet up higher is to pretend, step forward just a little bit, Jake. I want you to pretend like you have a stick coming out the inside of your shin, and on each step, you have to get your foot over that stick before you put it back down on the ground. So for an athlete who has their feet kind of low to the ground and it's more like a pendulum instead of a cycling action, this is a good cue to get them to step over something. So let's step over that hurdle now, the imaginary hurdle. So just get your knees up a little bit. Good, so you can see that he's starting to get his feet up a little bit higher. Now when he's at top speed, this is going to feel more and more natural. So what we're going to do is kind of back up, and we'll watch him take a couple of slightly longer runs so that you can see a little bit more what it would look like at top speed.